January 3rd, 1961, in Idaho, the United States experienced its first and hopefully only fatal nuclear accident. It was caused by the Army's SL-1 reactor. So, in the Cold War, we have nuclear power, and we're looking for new ways to use it in order to defend ourselves against the Russians. And the Navy came up with the idea of a nuclear powered submarine or a nuclear powered ship. I believe we have both now. The Air Force came up with the idea of a nuclear powered plane that could stay in flight for as long as it wanted to. And then the Army decided, hey, let's make a listening post in the Antarctic. Need power and heat, and a nuclear generator would do that, would do both. So that's what the Army decided. So, in order to understand why the SL-1 reactor happened the way that it did, we need to look at what a normal reactor is and does. So, a normal nuclear reactor has control rods. So, what control rods do is they absorb the neutrons that the radioactive material is firing out. Now, the reason that you want to do that is because when a neutron from a nuclear atom fires off, and if it hits another nuclear atom, it'll split more neutrons off. And those neutrons will hit other atoms, splitting off more and more neutrons. This is what's called a cascading effect. This is how you have a nuclear explosion. It happens very, very fast, and it generates a lot of heat. But using those control rods, you can control the amount of neutrons that strike other nuclear or radioactive atoms, thus limiting the amount of interaction with each other and only generating the heat necessary to generate steam, which is then pumped into another containment cell, which has a turbine that'll spin the turbine, which generates power. You can cycle that around an area, that heat, and use that in order to warm a place up as it returns back into the holding tank of a regular radioactive cell, right? So, in a normal radioactive power generator, you have those control rods, right? You would have anywhere from hundreds to thousands of control rods because you want to ensure, to the best of your ability, that a cascading effect can't happen because of some kind of malfunction or human error. You want all that safety in place, which is why a lot of nuclear reactors are safer than people realize. The SL-1 reactor, by comparison, had 5 control rods. Not 500, not 5,000. 5. And the main control rod was so powerful that it could start the entire reactor by itself. This is obviously not a good idea for reasons explained later. Many of the people who helped design and work on this reactor had constantly told the Army, this is not good. You need to go back to the drawing board. You need to try to make this safer because this is going to cause a lot of problems down the line. The Army was just like, yeah, whatever, keep working. So the problems that started to arise because of the design and the fact that the Army doesn't really like to throw money at these experimental things in order to ensure that they're safe enough is that sometimes the control rod would get stuck. A lot of the operators would have to use hammers, wrenches, and bang on the thing in order to get it to move. You might be asking yourself, why would you need to do that in the first place? So in 1960, you don't have a whole lot of computer technology. You do have machines that you can operate levers and stuff, and there is some integration with those computers. The thing is, when you completely power down this particular nuclear reactor, you completely insert the control rods in between all that nuclear material, and it stops any and all nuclear reactions. You have to disconnect it from the mechanism that lifts and lowers it to do so. So in December of the previous year, before Christmas and all that, they had shut down the SL-1 reactors. They had disconnected all the control rods from the mechanisms that raised and lowered them, and they all went home. The operators for this particular reactor were Specialist John Burns, Specialist Richard McKinley, and CB Richard Legg. I am not entirely certain why they had a Navy man with the rest of the soldiers on the SL1 reactor. I believe it was something to do with their jobs. But here is where things get a little muddy, right? So, for some reason, there is a myth that persists to this day. Some people think that one of the men was sleeping with one of the other men's wives, which was the reason why one of them was getting divorced. That is not true. It has never been proven, and the wife has never, ever admitted to any sort of infidelity. So, on the day of January the 3rd of 1961, the reactor was supposed to come back online. And to do this, the operators have to lift the control rods up approximately 4 to 6 inches in order to attach them to the mechanisms that raise and lower them. The problem is, remember how I said that that control rod was so powerful that it could activate the entire generator at once? They had asked a lot of the other operators before this, hey, do you know about this? And they said, yeah. It's what we would do if the Russians were to invade. We would pull that control rod, which is some pretty morbid foreshadowing, if you ask me. So, let's see here. So I gotta grab my notes here. So, according to what we know based off of where the bodies were found, Burns was lifting the control rod, Legg was standing over him, and McKinley was at the controls, a few feet away. Oh god, this part gets tough because it's unfortunate what happened. So the nearby fire department gets an alarm, and they head over to the scene. They're just like expecting walk in, see the guys, and find it to be another false alarm because Army. That's why. You know. So when they get there and their Geiger counters start going crazy, they think that their Geiger counters are broken. So they send somebody back to go grab some new ones and bring them back. And those are going crazy, which is when they knew that something was horribly, horribly wrong. So when they enter the room, obviously in radioactive gear, or radioactive protective gear, so that they don't get crazy forms of cancer, they find that the entire room is destroyed because the explosion was so small, it didn't damage any of the outside of the building, which is why they didn't really expect anything. But the scene was pretty gruesome. They found Burns against one of the walls. He was dead. What happened was the explosion had thrown him against the wall. It broke his ribs, which indicates just how forcefully he was thrown. And one of the ribs that had broken had punctured his heart. So he died almost immediately. McKinley was still alive. Thankfully, he was unconscious and he was transported to a hospital. Unfortunately, he died about 2 hours later due to head trauma, waiting on medical attention. Legg wasn't found right away. So they started to do the cleanup, and they're still wondering, where is Legg? What is going on? Why? Like, where's his body? Was he immediately vaporized or something? They had no idea what was going on. They were thinking maybe he wasn't here, until they saw what they thought was a bunch of rags hanging from the ceiling. It was the remains of Richard Legg. He had been impaled by one of the other control rods, which was fired like a rocket up into the ceiling. It went up through his groin and out through his shoulder. He had also died instantly, thankfully. None of the men suffered, which is one of the small things that we can take from this. The entire cleanup of the SL1 reactor site took around 18 months. They made sure to bury it properly, and they do inspections every couple of years to ensure that it's not leaking out and contaminating the rest of the desert around it. The three men were transported to the nearby hospital and placed into a morgue, and then the morgue was immediately sealed off until Dr. Clarence Lushbaugh, the body snatcher, could show up and perform the autopsy. At this point in time, Dr. Clarence Lushbaugh was the only doctor to perform an autopsy on a radioactive person in the United States. And the method with which he did so was he and his assistants would put on radioactive protective gear, go into the room with knives, hooks, and other instruments, taped to broom handles or sticks, long poles, and perform it that way in order to reduce the exposure to radiation. Men were autopsied, their causes of death were determined, and then they were buried in lead-lined casks. Never forget that the safety protocols that we have put in place are built on bodies. So that's pretty much all I've got for the SL1 reactor. This was the only fatal incident in the US history. Hopefully it stays that way. If you like this, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I do enjoy telling stories, so I'd like to do more. Other than that, hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you around.